Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. This is of course a strange show where each and every week we just take a different album, generate discussion about it of sorts, why not, So today I'm, battling, just a week of being very unwell, so this is going to be an incredibly slow episode, but considering the music we're looking at, I think it's going to work out because this is some incredibly slow, patient music. So, of course, we're looking at, it's a rather special album to me, This is, another one of my top favourite albums, in the world of minimalism and of ambient drone, I have to say. And I think this is an album that, in some ways, it's about as minimalist as it can truly get, as it uses just the faintest of motifs and loops to create these incredible ambient drones that completely wash over you. An amazing auditory experience, and as well, the project behind the whole thing is one that's incredibly rich and diverse, showcasing so much more than just the music itself. But more on that later. I'm very excited to discuss this one, so today I present Monochromes Vol.1 by throguh. And so, of course, who are throguh? Well, throguh is the name for an Italian multimedia project formed by members Rossano Polidoro and Emiliano Romanelli in 1998 that lasted up until the year of 2012. I should say as well, between the years of 1999 and 2002, throguh did become a trio for a brief period of time when they incorporated new member Andrea Gabriele into the mix as well. But for the most part, it seems the project has mostly just been the duo between members Polidoro and Romanelli. As well, since their humble beginnings, throguh have delved deep into the worlds of electronic music, video art, photography and graphic design. And I guess their mission statement, it could be summarized by a single paragraph on their website that reads as so. Through a personal use of digital and analog instruments, the throguh revealed a complex universe made up of present and past, closeness and distance, where seeing and listening became a meditative contemplation. And so throguh, a project that is, so much more than just what we're hearing here, of course, isn't it? But also, also incorporating what we are experiencing and have experienced in relation to the very project itself, a project that incorporates a sense of reality into the framework of what it is. And so, a little bit of tangent time. There's going to be a lot of this in this video, so I do apologise. But, perhaps this is where we should mention that the name of throguh most likely originates from the painting of the same name by American artist Marcel Duchamp. And this incredibly long and abstract painting is one that incorporates a number of different objects, all rendered differently, from shadows to illustrated hands to real objects as well, apparently. And so I find it interesting, as I actually had no idea about this painting until I went to research about throguh for this very video, and just came across this painting, that actually seems to surmise some of the very notions and concepts that throguh approach in their own artistic endeavours, of the many facets of reality itself and how it can be expressed and experienced through art. A bit of a tangent, but a small point that I thought was worth mentioning now. So to get back on track, in today's episode we are of course reviewing Vol.1, Monochromes Vol.1 here, a 2009 album released on Richard Chartier's record label Line as its 40th official release. And this little album here is apparently amongst one of the most popular releases from Line, and was voted amongst the 15 best releases of 2009 in the area of electronic music by The Wire magazine. A fact that I just think is super cool. And so this physical album, though, it probably offers us our first insight into the world of monochromes, though. A world that is so much more than the 4 tracks embedded on this CD, of course, isn't it? But is instead a multimedia project woven together with audio files, video files, and immersive live shows. And on the website, once again, the project is described as so. A collection of modular audio and video compositions for 2 laptops, 2 mixing boards, 2 loudspeakers, 1 projector, 1 room. Sound and light vibrations reverberate inside the room, blending together in an enveloping monochrome that creates an atmosphere to be contemplated. So yeah, this is one of those albums where, a lot was revealed to me the further I decided to dive into it all. A multimedia project spanning many different years, comprised of many different artistic expressions, But as well, it is a truly beautiful album as well, though, one that really does hold on to minimalist notions, as we'll get into, And it lets just the barest of motifs just express such maximalist feelings and emotions, I find. And so yeah, my introduction to this entire project was through looking at the very album we're looking at today, Monochromes Vol.1, released all the way back in 2009 on Imprint. And this is such a brilliant starting point into the expansive world that the project presents to us, though. And before we begin diving into the music again, it's perhaps worth just reading the Bandcamp liner notes that accompany this very album release, just for that additional bit of context, more tangents, but just to get it done and out of the way. Monochromes Vol.1 is the new sound work by Italian multimedia duo 2M. The Monochromes series is a collection of modular audio and video compositions for electronic chamber ensemble. Fragile atmospheric colours made of sound, light and space. Released June 1st, 2009. Music composed, arranged and performed by 2M. Recorded live at Vico Santa Chiara Studio, Città Sant'Angelo, Italy on the 11th of June and 5th of July 2008. Asano Polidoro laptop mixing board. Emiliano Romanelli laptop mixing board. Cover image, still from the video, Monochrome VO6 2008. So of course a little bit more to digest here. Now, I just think that considering the nature of the project and the various parts that make up the whole here, explaining what has gone into this particular album release is perhaps just worth mentioning before we dive into the music itself. It's of interest to me that as well that this particular release is sourced from live performances of Monochromes all the way back in 2008, where 2M no doubt enveloped their audiences in those monochromatic colours, accompanied by these incredible beds of ambient sounds. One can just really imagine the majesty of those live performances, where, sadly there's little to no information regarding them currently except for some faint whispers amongst the internet. However, it is perhaps worth mentioning, another slight tangent time, that it was in 2023 that we actually got the follow-up to Monochromes Vol.1 with the digital-only release of Monochromes Vol.2, which featured 8 new compositions, numbered 21 to 28, all sourced from the same live performances, it seems. And some of you might remember that album as having made the list of my favourite albums from 2023, as it was such a wonderful surprise to have seen during that year, a return to the wonderful drifting ambient music that captured the hearts of so many different people. But diving into that album, maybe another day, as today we're of course discussing Volume 1, aren't we? So let's get on with it, shall we? And so aptly opening up with Monochrome 1, we get a very quiet, gentle bed of ambient drones, swelling up in size as it pushes through the air itself like waves upon the clouds themselves. And the loop used for this one, it makes itself known rather presently, just letting it become a constantly occurring swell. What I love though is how sad and melancholy it sounds though, those very gentle textures that occur repeatedly, pulling you further and further into the pathos that the music presents. I find it becomes a little drone that I completely get lost with it, and it makes it for me, rather difficult to notice the appearance of any new musical motifs, as I'm just always stuck within that loop, and just stuck within and just lost within the experience. They are certainly present though, like the cracking of some note hovering in the distance, or even just the resonant qualities of that drone itself. It just loops over and over, feeling as though there's rather tiny, minute and subtle manipulations of it that, as it creates this sense of nostalgia almost, as we hear the prominent motif just over and over again. But I love that odd little pull that the album manages to present, pulling you into the music and then out of the music and then into it again and back out of it. It occurs constantly throughout not just this composition but the entire album, it feels, and it's a wonderful experience experience, if that makes sense. I have to say though, with how long this composition plays out for, we really do get used to the setting that the music presents, These monochrome landscapes reflected upon each other, it's pure minimalism. And it's reminiscent to me of the qualities of William Basinski's music, especially like the disintegration loops, where the music itself was made up of just, loops, motifs. But also, this kind of music, it reminds me of the mono-no-aware quality that music like this so often ends up creating, a rather heavy, weighty sadness of it all. And just in the way that the drones rise with these peculiar contours that result in something so emotional and heavy, I find. It's always the kind of thing that draws me into music like this, that just inhabiting that melancholy soundscape for a time just results in this very, marvellous experiences and just a heavy emotional resonance, I find. But I love how the album is so delicate and fragile in that sense. A whole navigation through the pains of emotions expressed to us in the form of such minimalist and barely occurring music almost. And it amazes me throughout the many occurrences of that loop, you get so many intermittent little moments that have hardly happened, appearing only for the briefest of instances. The ambience just swells and decays all around it. It is a truly beautiful opening track, and it just always gets me at my heart every time I hear it, I have to say. But of course, we do move on to the second track, Monochrome 2, which has another very quiet opener, establishing that ambient loop. And its melody feels, so brief almost, and one of its many instances that we become so familiar with as we navigate throughout this particular composition. And its character, though, is one of a gently swelling note that rises up for a few moments before fading back into the recesses of these twirling drones. And it becomes another hypnotizer, one that features very lowercase tendencies, I find, just occurring so faintly around the composition itself. But this one, for me, it's a really lovely one, I think, especially when you just get these gentle rises of what feels like field recordings just gently humming alongside that peculiar looping ambience. But there is, of course, that melancholy that comes through the particulars of the melody itself, though. Like, so much of Monochromes just feels so just heavy and emotional and weighty, like it's just pulling down on you in this physical way. And I love how it does it on this one as well. Like, it just really just pulls you into that world. But I find its little motifs and everything going on, it's like it can only exist for these faintest of moments though in such a clouded landscape. And it perhaps reminds me a lot of those peculiar horizons you can sometimes see when you close your eyes. So I'll say here, oftentimes, much like when I sit down to listen to the likes of Pink Courtesy Phone, I often experience this particular album, during weary states of slumber, resting for a couple of hours, having a nap essentially, and letting the gentle guiding hand of ambient music pull me there. And I find it's in those hazy half asleep moments where your eyes are mostly closed, and letting the music play, and you're getting the light just attempting to break through the cracks between your very eyelids, influenced by the very brain's sleepy interpretation of what might be colours perhaps, know where they might be going, just spiraling off into the darkness. It feels, it's a very difficult thing to try and explain, as I never know how much is just the feeling of being exhausted anyway, or the subtle manipulations are happening behind the island. Maybe it's all a part of that pull into the gentle dream world itself, but this is something that I feel is a little bit important when it comes to this album, but maybe it's just because of my experience of it, my reality when it comes to this album, though. The fact that it's such a beautiful album to just fall asleep to, that kind of hazy image of the horizon is something that comes across a lot when hearing this, and considering the multimedia aspect of this and the very videos that are playing throughout this video, as you might have seen, it really does remind me of that sort of hazy image you get when your eyes are closed and you see those colours just, morphing and changing. Difficult to try to explain, of course. So, moving along, we get to Monochrome 3, which is perhaps my favourite out of the four of them, but they're all my favourites as well. But this one is such a sad ride of ambient swells and rising frequencies that builds up before regressing and fading into the background, leaving just the quietest intermittent crackles and fuzz from lowercase instances. And this one I find to be incredibly emotional, though, in the way in which the melody slowly rises in amongst the horizon. It brings with it such a sense of melancholy and pathos once more. And maybe it's in the way that the particulars of it all, just seem to just vanish into these garbled drones of ambience, these synthetic layers caught within the patterns of effects. I find it so delightful to listen to, even as it leaves me feeling so wistful and melancholy. And once again, the sadness of things, mono no aware. I find it so odd that, minimalist works that explore this very notion always connect with me on this odd emotional level. The instances of very little occurring for their time, still able to express that weight and sadness, though. Maybe as well, this being the shortest of all the tracks on this particular album on Monochromes, it's interesting that, with it being so brief, it does feel way more emotional, perhaps. Of course, Volume 2 did introduce a longer lineup with a lot of shorter tracks of varying lengths, but for this one, this is the shortest we have here, but as mentioned, my favourite of them. I just love how those ambient sweeps just build into the landscape, passing it on to other accompanying drones and frequencies before letting that garbled lowercase occur so oddly within that mix as well. And it's often, again, to me, that expression of so many facets to so little, letting these evolutions within the very sound themselves happen so faintly to begin with, until their appearances stand out so briefly before fading back once again. It's a beautiful track, easily a favourite of mine, and just a very existential experience of just navigating the dark horizon to sleep for me as the colours just swarm, twirl, and do their thing, essentially. And so, we do get one more track for this album, Monochromes 4, the longest of the compositions lasting roughly just a half hour. And I feel as minimal, as melancholy, as quiet and as sad as this album has been, it feels like we'd be given that back tenfold on the album's closer here. Everything just gently fades in, so quietly, barely swelling up in size like the preceding tracks, and instead just humming away these very quiet little melodies, it feels. And I just love how patient and calm this one is. The loop used to build up much of the composition. It does reveal itself after some instances, and we realise actually just how brief these drones truly are when we do become aware of that loop, if that makes sense. It occurs only faintly before starting up once again. And of course, within the mix of it all, you're getting lovely quiet lowercase just gently occurring, crackling softly within the various parts of your headphones, it feels. And maybe it's in part to the length, but this is perhaps the most drifty of all the compositions here. And perhaps one of the hardest one of these songs to write about the effects of, as the effects of this particular track are so incredibly narcotic, I would say. Just really pulling you into that sleepy, dreary, just slumber, essentially. it's like everything is all just completely slowed down in amongst this bed of ambience that rises and falls with its own intermittent motifs, you know. And maybe it's because most of the time this song is playing, I have most likely already fallen asleep by this point, or very soon will. But you know, this track, it's a little peculiar to me, you know, like the whole album's a little peculiar to me, as you know, the opening track certainly does lull me, before letting the second track further begin that descent into weighty slumbers. You know, awareness itself being pulled away from what's in front of you as you get dragged down into the strange dream worlds, you know, worlds where you just get fields with rows of trees lining down the length of it one by one, or just a well atop of a hill, a mountain overlooking a tiny beach hidden away in the recesses of the cliffs, or even just an incredibly large boat liner, its hallways stretching outwards in a loop like a shopping centre full of escalators, businesses and people wandering around, before that turns into a school, you know, classrooms, chairs, rooms. But in amongst all of those visions, you know, feelings and emotions, you know, and it's here that it all becomes so very abstract as new occurrences begin, you know, pulling you down strange paths down the uncanny valley. Family homes that I never lived in. Education I never participated in. The invention of these things happening and being experienced despite never having existed at all. How incredibly strange. But of course, the reality that this music helps influence as you just fall asleep and your mind naturally conjures up, you know, its images that it always conjures up. So, a bit of a weird tangent there, but I just wanted to see how far that little thought would go. I don't know if it makes any sense, of course. It's just naturally where my mind wanders to when I get pulled into those sleepy states. And because Monochromes manages to pull me there so effortlessly, you know, it's always a beautiful thing to experience, hence why I wanted to try mention the various images and dreams that my brain ends up conjuring up, essentially. But like, you know, this constantly evolving and decaying bed of ambient waves just briefly occurring over and over just all helps to influence those various images. And to go back to it all, I do love how the composition just navigates those spaces so freely, you know, just finding new occurrences from time to time, hidden in amongst those vast open horizons. Really beautiful music, and I can easily see why this is a particular favourite amongst so many people when it comes to line Imprint. There's just something so special and fragile about how all of these compositions sound, you know, just occurring as they are. Gently beautiful, moving, minimalist ambient drones that drift past so effortlessly, so easily with their big expanses of air. And I adore how minimal the whole project is for the most part, and yet the result of all of these minimal creative decisions has resulted in something that feels so truly big and expansive though. Music that just completely surrounds you and envelopes you in its many ambient waves. So essentially we've covered Monochromes Vol.1 by 2M here. I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. It's a bit of a difficult one to try and unpack, but I will try my best, you know. One thing to try discuss is, you know, the very breadth and scope of the Monochromes project itself, you know, not just the album we're looking at, but also the multimedia project, which you have briefly touched upon. Now, on the CD, we are of course presented with just the very first 4 compositions of this project, named Monochromes 1 to 4. However, the website for the very project reveals so much more than what we have here. As mentioned in the beginning, from the excerpt featured from the very page, Monochromes is less of an album, and rather a collection of modular audio and video compositions. Its intent is to create an atmosphere for audiences to have it and experience, making it not just an album to be heard, but rather an art piece to be, well, experienced. It is perhaps why the particulars of the music itself feel so incredibly emotional and contemplative in their own right, though, as it's all the result of these many different art forms all coming together, creating something that extends out far beyond just what has been encoded onto a mere CD here. there's so much more to it than what simply we have here, including the very compositions themselves. The website reveals that of the 9 audio compositions, including Monochromes 00 that precedes the 4 we've heard today, their lengths are actually undefined, and instead expressed as an abstract, a range from as short as 7 minutes to as long as 40 minutes. It perhaps goes some way to explain to us the rather cylindrical nature of, the music itself, as it just loops over and over and over into the infinite, creating such a space and time for you to sit down and contemplate it on. And then, of course, the videos themselves, scattered throughout this very review, of course, all in a very important part of the experience too, of creating minute worlds of colour that stretch out towards that distant horizon. Worlds for us to just exist within and feel exactly what it is our minds and bodies feel when experiencing this type of music. And I'll be honest, it's hard to really summarise into a review or whatever these videos are, but with it being part of the context, I thought it was important to mention, though, as it all ties into it all, basically. It's all linked together, and I think it's truly amazing as a result of that. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this album. I don't really know how to articulate the rather abstract nature of what this album makes me feel. I've tried my best, but I can only do some. I don't think I'm the best at explaining these things, truth be told, but I want to at least try as the point of these videos. But I just think it's one of those albums that is exactly what it is and nothing more, just the beauty of little. And of course I find it remarkable on so many levels, the actual album itself and its structuring is truly fantastic, but to then dive into the whole entire project is to discover such a wonderful world of multimedia that's been created by through. From the painting that most likely inspired the names we mentioned earlier, to the actual works the artist released under the moniker, to the very project we're looking at today, to the multitude of artistic releases under this umbrella of Monochromes. It's a truly rewarding and insightful journey. And I'll be honest, much like when we reviewed Relocation Reconstruction by Yann Novak, diving into this very album has revealed so much more context that I never knew beforehand, really helping to shape my understanding of this album to something much bigger than just the physical releaser. It's perhaps the gift of music sometimes that whenever you decide to sit down and dive into a particular album release, you end up discovering way more than you ever meant to sometimes. And I always think there's something very cool and amazing about that, even though I've barely touched the surface of how deep the Monochromes project goes, I think. And before we close off, perhaps we should, briefly return to the very opening of this video, sort of tie into that cylindrical quality once again, go back to the quote that the accompanying quote of this very album featured on the website for the project and also on the back of the CD here. The quote from Jean Cocteau: "A poet always has too many words in his vocabulary. A painter, too many colours on his palette. A musician, too many notes on his keyboard." For me, it's a little quote that really helps sum up a lot of what has gone into the particular artistic endeavour of this album, this project in my books, of using exactly what is needed to express the vision, nothing more and nothing less. And it perhaps expresses to me the importance of minimalism as well, Not that there's anything wrong with maximalism or using too much of one thing, Sometimes art, albums, art pieces, films, whatever, art that uses so much can end up being incredibly experiences in a right, of course. But the consideration of how using little can also express a plethora of ideas and concepts is something that's always fascinated me. And I think this particular album manages to perfectly express everything it needs to express, and nothing more than that. Just a beautiful, atmospheric, contemplative experience that has you existentially pondering your own experience of the music itself, both in the reality of the now and the reality of the then. And so I think with that we will be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. Incredibly abstract concept of an album to try explain in this video, but as mentioned, one of my favourite ambient albums, and something I've genuinely always wanted to discuss on the show for an incredibly long time and just never got around to writing about. Now, it is an album though that I have listened to countless times in so many different contexts as well, from being awake to even being asleep, just letting the music influence my very thoughts and minds, and just my thoughts and the reality of what's happening around me, if that makes sense. And it is difficult to summarise, especially considering how expansive the entire project actually was, many different facets. Maybe it's impossible to, who knows. In any case, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. Links to the album, to Line Imprint, to UM's webpage outlining the project itself, all available in the description below for you to go and check out. For now, I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye.